Undergirding.
Okay.
So Brenda, Suzanne, over to you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. It's actually really wonderful to see faces. I haven't been a part of very many Zoom meetings in this fashion, and I've never been the speaker at one. So this is a new experience for me that I'm appreciative of. And again, Jim, thank you again for inviting me, and thank you everyone for showing up and just wanting to listen about my own spiritual journey and Buddhism, what Buddhism means to me, and some of a general overview of what that's about. So we've got, how many people are here in total? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I've got 10.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, there's probably 12 because counting Jim and Dave.
Amazing. And I just love to see people's faces. So I just want to make sure I get everybody's face here. Okay, this is great. So here's kind of what I thought that we could do. I'm gonna share, I wrote something that sort of tries to speak to my own personal formation and my own spiritual journey. So I'm gonna kind of read a piece that will take maybe 5 or 10 minutes, at which time we can pause and have any questions or discussion around that. And then I just created a bit of a slideshow that will go into, you know, the general overview of Buddhism. And we can pause. I've got a couple places where we can pause in between. And again, please engage, please ask any questions. The caveat being, I am not a scholar. I am a student of Buddhism on the path to awakening. And I welcome every question. I welcome any thought. Let it be a place of connection, and let it be a place that I hopefully we can enrich each other's spirituality in this. Okay, good. So I'm going to begin by sharing my own spiritual journey to give you some context to me, my background, my lived experience, as this all comes from my life as a white-bodied settler woman living in North America. What I share of Buddhism is going to look vastly different from what Buddhism may look like for a 50-year-old layman living in Japan, or a 20-year-old Tibetan Buddhist nun living in Nepal. It is too vast to capture in language in this small amount of time, and it is a moving target that is constantly transforming, just as I know Christianity to be, and just as I know humanity to be. I was raised with no religion or spiritual practices inside my family of origin. Both of my parents came out of Anglo-Saxon cultures, a mix of working class, middle class backgrounds. When I was 6 years old, my mother had me baptized in an Anglican church, just to cover the bases, baby, she said. Although my father's formation was influenced by the stiff upper lip Protestant repression of the 40s and 50s, as an adult, his spiritual grounding was found in the natural world, with a particular reverence and devotion to the cycles of seasons and the miraculous ecology of the earth. When I was 7 and my sister was 9, we went to our parents and we asked if we could go to church with some friends from school. Their parents came and they picked us up, and we attended Sunday school a few times. I remember being frightened of the image of Christ on the cross, but very much enjoying the grape freshie and cookies and picture books of Jesus as he helped people. I think we just went a handful of times as we were rather feral creatures, country bumpkins, and the call to the woods and the fields and the sky resonated so deeply that we ended up spending our Sundays lost in the cathedrals of nature. Fast forward to being a teenager. I'm growing up in small town Ontario in the 1980s, a town that was economically depressed, a town that had elements of xenophobia, homophobia, a town that was racist, that had elements of racism in it, and that was very frightened of difference. It was also during my adolescence that I discovered my ability to fall in love with both girls and guys. And this transgressive aspect of my sexuality felt both very frightening and very liberating, because being queer or being gay in the 1980s in my small town was not possible. It was just not an option. I didn't fit into any prescriptive categories of society at that time. I didn't fit into my gender, the constraints of heterosexuality, the middle-class values of the small town I lived in. I felt confined by just about every aspect of my identity. Everything felt like an ill-fitting tight suit that I couldn't breathe in. Besides my brief forays with my sister at Sunday school, I also soaked up the Christian culture of that time that for me in the 70s and 80s was pretty much 100 Huntley Street. I began to fear God and Jesus, almost as if they were spies overhearing all the dirty secrets that were in my head, all the imaginary fantasies and the swear words that I spoke. And I thought that there was maybe some giant ledger up in the sky that was dooming me. I have always been weary of doctrine, beliefs, theologies, religious and academic institutions. Such taxonomy of human experience I often find misses the mark, can barely point to the dynamic unfolding of a person's life. In my experience of institutional religion, it has failed to adequately capture or explain both the breadth of beauty and suffering that life has handed me, the dichotomy and the complexity that reality offers. But love, art, and nature, they have continued to call out to me, hardly ever with answers, but mostly by reducing me to states of awe and a deep embodied communion with the universe. Two other very important formative experiences that shaped my spirituality. In my late 20s, I went to visit my sister in East Asia, and I found myself her shadow. I was following her through Thailand and Cambodia. Here in these countries, I had my first experience of entering a temple, lighting some incense, and sitting in silence with a group of strangers, some lay people and some monastics, nothing but silence. Well, temple silence, which still holds the scratch of dog nails across the wooden floor, the honks of traffic out the windows, the snorts and guffaws of the meditators around me. I hadn't been given any direction to follow my breath, to allow my thoughts to pass like clouds in the sky of my mind. All of that would come later. But I did experience a glimpse of what I later would discover is my Buddha nature. And that experience lodged like a diamond inside my mind. Fast forward another few years later, and I'm in Zambia, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, working with grassroots organizations, documenting with writing and photography, experiences of resilience and compassion of people living in extremity, in places with scarce resources and little social safety net, with people living and dying of HIV and AIDS, children living inside orphanages in Tanzania, and sexual assault and genocide survivors in Rwanda and Burundi. I would sit with people in refugee camps. I would sit with people on buses, at watering holes, in cassava fields, around dinner tables, or in the rooms of makeshift hospices. I was 30 years old, a queer woman in a white body traveling alone through countries that had been ravaged by colonialism, the greedy forces of imperialism and capitalism, war, disease, and genocide. Amid these experiences, I kept holding this burning question inside of me. What makes a person want to survive? What makes a person not only survive, but at times flourish amidst times of extreme adversity? What aspect of the soul, the psyche, the body keeps attempting to rise each day against all odds? I was obsessed with that question and that mystery, and I remain so today. When I returned to Canada, I had a spiritual and psychological breakdown and breakthrough of sorts. What was transformative about this time was that I discovered two things. I found a really remarkable psychotherapist, and I found meditation. I am reminded of a Buddhist teacher I love. Her name's Christina Feldman. And she says, quote, "A crisis is a terrible time to begin a spiritual practice," end quote. And she's right. And yet so many of us find out the hard way that suffering itself is the teacher. If you find ways to move towards the pain and suffering rather than away from it, Instead of destroying you, it can liberate you. The way that grief psychotherapist Julia Samuel says, quote, pain itself is the agent of change. It's counterintuitive to our survival, to our very neurological hardwiring. But I was able to sit with a therapist and found a safe space to encounter my own suffering, as well as rediscover a curiosity to explore that diamond that got lodged in my mind back in Cambodia. Around the same time, a friend had purchased me Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart. And I thought, oh God, my life is really a cliche. And I kept that book on my bookstand, kept it on my bookstand for months until one day, one night, I opened it up and I came across this passage, quote, don't believe everything you think. Through therapy, I had been discovering that I was mistaking my thoughts, this tyrannical, punitive monster inside my mind, as if it were me. Soon after that, I was meditating at the Toronto Zen Center, and Roshi Henderson said something similar. He said, Suzanne, you are not your thoughts. It was the simplest sentence. And it hit me as if I was a naked woman wearing only rubber boots atop a mountain in a lightning storm. This came as no less than revelatory to me. As someone who had suffered throughout my life, who had suffered from undiagnosed depression and anxiety into my late 20s. This was as important as discovering the benefits of pharmacological therapy. It was groundbreaking, and it was life-changing. From there, I devoured every book I could find on meditation and mindfulness, and inevitably, it led to this long, slow-burning love affair I have with Buddhism. I went on retreats, I developed daily contemplative practices, I attended centers affiliated with all three of the Buddhist traditions, Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And throughout these past 15 years since then, I have also continued to face some personal adversity in regards to health. One being my mother's lengthy journey with breast cancer. She died a few years back in 2018, and my own diagnoses of breast cancer, first in 2013 at the age of 39, and again this year at the age of 46. Buddhism, its practices, its philosophies, and teachings have become the foundation and the foundations for my own spiritual life. It's the lens through which I make meaning, the moral compass I utilize to move through the world, the daily practices I engage and attempt to embody both on and off the cushion. After my first diagnosis with breast cancer, I did a bit of a 180 in my life. I quit my job, a very secure, dependable job as an administrator in child welfare with salary and benefits. That was something pretty unique in my life. I hadn't had salary and benefits. And I decided to pursue this dream I had to become I wasn't sure what to call it, a chaplain, a therapist, an end-of-life grief counselor. The lexicons of spiritual care and psychotherapy seemed to marry two ways of helping people that I wanted to become adept at, that I wanted to devote my life to. I found the program at University of Toronto's Emmanuel College and completed a Master's of Pastoral Care in Buddhism. During my education, I began what are called, as Jim so well knows, clinical pastoral education placements in hospitals. I worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, supporting patients in the Women's Forensic Unit and Gerontology units, as well as the University Health Network in neurology and the general internal medicine units. Once I got a taste of what spiritual care looked like in these settings, I was hooked. I fell in love. It led to my career as a spiritual care practitioner in healthcare. And for the past 3 years, before having to take some time off because of this most recent cancer diagnosis, I have worked in the intensive care unit at Toronto General Hospital, supporting patients, families, and staff as they experience trauma, grief, and spiritual distress. This past year, I've begun attending an online Sangha, Sangha being a spiritual community. And in some ways, it's due to COVID that I found this. It's an online Sangha that is as diverse as my journey through Buddhism. It is led by a wonderful, powerful teacher. Her name is Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who identifies as a Black, queer, cisgendered woman a Zen priest ordained in the Soto tradition. I think there are about 300 of us stretched across North America, Mexico, Hong Kong, Japan, and Europe. It's a Sangha that prioritizes people of color and Indigenous voices and their experiences. And it's the first time I've ever really been engaged in what I can only call a trauma-informed spiritual care community. I do this at work, but it blows my mind that this level of care and understanding can also be found in my spiritual community. Again, imagine the naked woman in the rubber boots atop the mountain. It's a bit like that all over again with this Sangha. Whenever I hear the teachings or whenever I participate in the meditation sits and retreats. Reverend Angel says things like, quote, "Are we going to know ourselves more fully by the fact of our difference or in spite of our differences? To know who we are in relationship to difference or against difference?" As a teacher, she believes in offering people the logos and then getting out of the way. Quote, "There is no such thing as a singular truth." When she says this, I hear it and it rings like a Tibetan singing bowl in my mind, as it also reflects the orientation I take as a spiritual care practitioner in the hospital. Clinically, this is called, it's a fancy term, it's called pragmatic religious constructivism, that there is no single truth when I am sitting at the bedside of patients, families, and staff. And that leads me back to the Buddha, when he says, there are 84,000 paths to enlightenment. I'm going to stop there for a moment and just check in with folks. That's a little bit of me. That's the person in the little screen in your window. That's a little bit of me. It's such a surreal world we live in, and I want to be more than a single dimension in your life as you hear this. Okay. So at this point, that's sort of a little bit about you, giving you some context about what my journey is, who's sitting here with you. And I'd love to hear where does that land? What do you hear when you hear that? What does it make you mostly reflect for yourself in your own life, in your own spiritual journey?
Feels like I've had a pretty simple journey. It's hard for me to imagine a single woman by herself traveling all across those countries in the middle of all that distress and sadness and trauma. It's
The courage.
yeah, the courage that just hard to get my head around that.
Thank you.
I was curious, you mentioned early on about you were drawn, the suffering made you stronger. Did I get that right?
Oh, that the ability to sit with the suffering in itself, the ability to sit with the pain and suffering becomes the agent of change. It becomes the teacher. If you're in a place of being able to not run away from it. What is interesting is I think what I have such reverence for spiritual care educators, Jim, and kind of what we're taught in CPE, in our clinical pastoral education as spiritual care practitioners, is that when there's a emotional fire, a spiritual fire in the hospital, we have to run towards it, not away from it. Yeah. And it becomes a skill, a very incredible, it becomes a skill to run towards it, but it also can become a place of profound liberation and healing when you actually move towards it and sit with it. It can transform you. And I seem to find that over and over again in my life.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood something. I know a little bit about Buddhism, and that the idea, the Enlightenment came to to the Buddha sitting under the tree, and he realized that life was suffering. And I always thought he meant the cessation of suffering was other people. Is it the cessation of suffering within yourself? Is that maybe I didn't understand that properly.
That when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree,
Yes.
what he found, what he talked about was discovering, which I'll talk about in the slideshow, but was discovering that element of what is called the Dharma, which is called like the nature of reality, and that sense of that paradoxical sense of life has suffering in it, that's just a fact of life, that we all have suffering in it.
Yeah.
And that there are ways in which you can sit with suffering, work with suffering as a means to alleviate yourself from suffering, if that makes any sense. That to a certain extent, watching and engaging in teachings, spiritual practices around understanding what the nature of suffering is in your life enables you to transcend it sometimes.
Well, the ultimate thing is the cessation of suffering, right? That was the last one.
That's right. That yes, we're going to
You
cover that.
identify it, you address it, you work on it, and you get rid of it, right?
Well, that's the goal. I have yet to manifest that, but absolutely, that's the goal. Absolutely, yeah. It's a good question. I think in some of the slides it'll kind of go through some of those key points that you're speaking to.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about Zen Buddhism.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And
Yes.
the whole idea, the idea of bringing you into a question that really doesn't have an answer, and then at some moment suddenly you realize it just everything just kind of snaps into place.
Yes.
But again, I don't know any Zen Buddhists, and I've only know what I've read in books. So
yes, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think a lot of at least Christian denominations tend to see suffering as, what did I do to deserve this, rather than what can I learn from it.
Yes.
And there is a tendency to run away from it rather than, to live into it.
Yes.
And in fact, while my mother was dying of cancer herself, one of her Christian friends told her she wasn't praying hard enough.
Ooh.
So there's that notion, I think, that suffering is a sign of something lacking in spiritual depth, or some need to be more prayerful, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep, and I certainly hear that with patients and families and staff as well. Absolutely, that can be, that can be a devastating message to carry inside of yourself. Yeah.
Could you say more about how when you're aware that suffering is where you are, what's the process look like to embrace it, to sit with it?
So I'll give you an example from work. When I am about to enter a room where perhaps somebody is coding, somebody is dying, somebody's just had a terrible experience, and there's a family member at the bedside, and they're incredibly distraught, and I'm going in to engage with the suffering that's in that room. Part of the key for me is to set a pretty clear intention on the outset. And inside my mind, what I sometimes do is that I say a little mantra. I say to myself, may I offer this love, be it met with acceptance, rejected, or met with indifference. And I set that as an intention in my mind. And then I go through the door, and I am open to whatever happens inside of that door. And to a certain extent, that in itself allows me to be a presence inside of suffering, that becomes just a loving, anchored presence that is not attached to any outcome, that is not clinging to what is going to be right or wrong in this situation, and that is not attached to a quote unquote good outcome or a quote unquote bad outcome. Does that make sense?
It's a non-anxious presence.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Mhm.
Certainly for myself, I know that as I look back on my life, the times
Yeah.
of greatest growth have been the times of greatest suffering as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that that's true. I had put a quote in there by Julia Samuels, a grief psychotherapist. She wrote a great book that I love called Grief Works. And that quote is when she's talking about pain itself being the agent of change, and how paradoxical that is, where we have lost somebody, let's say the person that we love who has died, who we've lost, and all we want to do is not to feel the pain of it because it hurts too much, because it's the worst feeling ever. And yet our resistance to feeling the pain causes more pain. And our resistance to not letting that grief in, not letting that loss in, actually makes the pain grow bigger and circle it and circle it. And what she talks about is, and what she sees, and what I've seen over and over again in my life, is when you can welcome yourself to sit with that pain with a loving presence, in prayer, in therapy, with a friend. What it does is that it to a certain extent, it helps to, I wouldn't say diffuse it, but it helps to shift it.
Mhm.
And you learn things about yourself, exactly what you're saying. To sit with it transforms you. It makes you wiser. It makes you kinder. It makes you more empathic. It doesn't mean that it ever goes away. It does not mean that. But you're right. It transforms you if you can sit with it. Yeah.
I think that the fact that you say that the outcome doesn't matter. I mean, if you go into it thinking that somehow you've got to leave this person feeling better,
Yeah.
and cheer them up, or
Yes.
really that can have a negative impact on their journey rather than a positive one.
Yes. I think that, yes, absolutely. Because then it's about your agenda. And then you forget to be present about what's going to come up. And you actually miss what is happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Diana, do you want to, should we
Sure.
kind of go through a few of the slides that I have? And it kind of, again, please understand that it's just a very cursory overview of what Buddhism, of some of kind of the key tenets in Buddhism, and quite frankly, what Buddhism means to me. It's very much an individual take. And so I begin with this quote: "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." That's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen Buddhist monk, originally from Vietnam. When I probably heard that quote maybe 10 years ago, and I literally got goosebumps. And I kind of felt like I heard that quote, and I think he kind of summed up Buddhism for me in a line. And I think that's Buddhism for me. I can't possibly unpack that, but just sit with that. And I say here too, this is a spiritual practice I do. Today is day 16,669 of awakening. So today is March 17th, 2021, but it is also the 16,669th day that I'm alive. And so each day I take note of that. I take note of how many days I'm alive. And it's a very brief, momentary, sacred act of giving thanks to the fact that I am, and also holding the reality of not knowing how many more I have left.
Yeah.
Does that ring true?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So, who was this guy? Who was the Buddha? The Buddha was a man named Siddhartha Gautama that lived approximately 6th century BCE along the border of India and Nepal. He was born into a life of affluence, initially living a pretty sheltered life in a palace, a palatial life. He married at 16 and gave birth to a son. But life held a dissatisfaction, and the world beyond his castle walls kept beckoning. It's like he was raging against that sheltered life. When he did engage with society, he had 4 experiences that changed his life. He saw a sick man, he saw an old man, and he saw a dead body being carried to the burning grounds. So he encountered sickness, aging, and death. And he also encountered a sadhu, known as a holy person. After he had these experiences, he went back home, and at the age of 29, he renounced his life and became penniless and homeless in search for the resolution to the problem of suffering. Can we go to the next slide?
Mhm.
Contextually, he was also a man that was living during a time where the Indian caste system was in place, where there were very extreme, there was Hindu practices of asceticism, which meant that there were just, there was a culture of spiritual practices that were about engaging in, let's say, extreme practices of self-mortification, trying to starve yourself as a means for purification, for getting to an enlightened place. Sleeplessness, fasting for days at a time, just very, very extreme practices that kind of went to the polarity of nihilism almost. And then the opposite end of that, he was also witness to Vedic priests that were also very much reaping the rewards and living a very opulent lives with the powerful, wealthy clansmen at that time. And so he saw those 2 extremes, and he thought, what if I'm trying to figure out about the nature of reality and suffering, that's the paradigm that he was looking at. Those are the polarities that he was caught between. So at the age of 35, he was said to have experienced enlightenment, as you were saying, under a Bodhi tree, which liberated him from the nature of suffering. It is at this point he becomes the Buddha, or the awakened one. At the urging of his peers, it is said that he did not want to teach, but at the urging of his peers, he began to teach the Dharma, what he had learned about the nature of reality, and the path that leads to awakening and enlightenment. During the next 45 years of his life, he amasses thousands of followers, creates a large Sangha or monastic community that inherits his teachings and becomes the foundational tenets of Buddhism. He dies at the age of 80, passing into Nirvana. And when you look at this map, it kind of just gives you a little sense of what's happening in the first 1,000 years of Buddhism. If you see right up there, Bodh Gaya, that's where the Buddha was. And his teachings travel, and they go down to Sri Lanka, they go over to Burma and Thailand, and that is sort of the teachings that are known as Theravada Buddhism, which align themselves very much with the teachings of the historical Buddha, with the early teachings of the Buddha. But then, as every religion does, as it travels and it starts to absorb the culture of the places it's traveling through, and it goes through China and starts to absorb the culture of what's going on in China, and goes over into Korea and Japan, where it's also very much influenced by Taoism. And as well, it goes, and that through China, Korea, Japan, it starts to become known or separated, the tradition separated, and it becomes known as the Mahayana tradition. And through that, there becomes 1/3 tradition that we don't see on this. And this is probably around 700 to 1100 CE. Buddhism finally takes hold in Tibet, and it becomes what is known as Vajrayana tradition. And again, it's transforming constantly. It's changing shape. It's changing priorities. It's absorbing all of the cultures of the people and the traditions that it's moving through. But this sort of gives you a bit of a sense of what's going on in that first 1,000 years of Buddhism, after the Buddha dies, that is. And this is what amazes me around the texts and the teachings. The Buddhist teachings were recited orally for almost 500 years before they were actually written down in 25 BCE. And that was actually revelatory to me in the sense that when I actually engage with some of the texts and the scripts, what you come up with and what you notice right away is that it's a series of lists. It's like, it's mathematical. It's almost like equations, like it's list after list after list. And I realized that that's how people remembered the teachings. They systematized the teachings because for 500 years orally, that's how they were passed down. And eventually, when they were finally written down, they were written down into what is called the 3 pitakas, or the 3 baskets. There's first the Vinaya Pitaka, and that was a group of teachings that essentially is disciplines adhered to by monastics, rules and ethical considerations relating to monks, nuns, and others living under religious vows. And so that was meant to kind of keep peace and a spiritual cohesion within the monastic community. Then there's the Tsutipitaka. Those consist of the main teachings of the historical Buddha. And they're separated into 5 different collections. And in the Tsutipitaka, you get a little bit more narrative. You get a little bit more like parables. You get a bit more story to understand the teachings through. And then the third would be called the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And that is those teachings and those texts they become a philosophical analysis and a systematization of the help me, you know it.
Systematization.
Thank you. And what's fascinating about the Abhidhamma is that it also becomes what is now known. It's like some of the foundation for what becomes Buddhist psychology in the West. And those are some pretty fascinating texts as well. Okay. So what did the Buddha teach? Well, he taught Dharma, which can be known as the natural law, a universal law that which governs both the physical and moral order of the universe. The Buddha discovered the Dharma that led to his awakening, but what's important is that he did not claim that he invented the Dharma. And this is an important fact in the sense that the Dharma already was in existence. What he did was discover its existence. And so in that way, when you think of the Dharma, it isn't something that is theistically created. It doesn't come from a God, it just is. It's the universal law that governs the physical moral order of the universe. Every aspect of life is regulated by Dharma, from the succession of the seasons to the movement of constellation and planets. Dharma manifests in the laws of karma, which govern the way moral deeds affects individuals. So the law of cause and effect. Living in accordance with Dharma, or living in accordance with the natural law, according to the Buddha, leads to happiness, fulfillment, and salvation. And here we can look at salvation as freedom from the endless cycles of rebirth, which was about the cosmology of that time, the belief in the constant cycles of rebirth. But what I found, how I relate to that teaching in a way that I find very helpful for myself, is that I appreciate a number of teachers have started to frame for me the idea of the cycles of rebirth and samsara, being caught in that cycle of rebirth and suffering, is to almost look at it on a moment-to-moment basis, to try to understand samsara as something that happens on a moment-to-moment basis, in the sense that you can close your eyes and think about, or you can think over the course of one day, how many times did you think the same negative thought over and over and over again? How many times could you not put that storyline down over and over and over again? And so a part of what the Dharma is trying to do is to also free you from that type of cyclical suffering on the most minute level, as well as generational level. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, let's go to karma. And again, I get these concepts are really, they're big. And part of it is that I'm trying to just find examples that actually help me understand it, because I'm still understanding them myself, but to try to use language that feels accessible and that feels like it's in touch with reality, I guess. So karma, the law of cause and effect. The law of karma refers to the law of cause and effect, that every volitional act brings about a certain result. If we are motivated by greed, hatred, or delusion, we are planting the seeds of suffering. When our acts are motivated by generosity, love, or wisdom, then we are creating the karmic conditions for abundance and happiness. And in this way, karma is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's just a result of what your actions are. And I want to use some, I wanted to use an example. Sorry, I just got to look down here. Oh, I'm going to give you an example of this. This is actually, I was trying to think about examples that I could use to embody how I understand karma in my life. And something that happened at work for me was, I was on the unit and I was working with a family that was going through a very hard time. And during this time, a patient and her mother came onto the unit in crisis, and I did not get to see them at all, but they were witnessing me working with this other patient and family in crisis. And they were witnessing my actions, they were witnessing the results of my actions, they were witnessing what kind of care I was able to provide and how that did or didn't transform the patient and family's experience. About a month later, I get a call on my voicemail saying, "Hi, this is so-and-so. I know that you haven't met me, but we saw you and we witnessed your care, and we're back in the hospital, and my daughter's dying, and she wants you to come provide care for her." And that, when I got that phone call, it amazed me that the deeds and the actions of what I was doing a month ago, not even understanding anything about the ripples of it, not even understanding the ripples of how that was affecting anybody else around me, came back to hopefully be a beneficial experience for another patient who was dying, finding somebody that she felt comfortable and safe enough to walk that journey with her. That's an example of karma to me. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's the same belief that Christians have when they practice it.
Tell me about that. I'd love to hear more.
I think it's just the fact that you are not aware of your actions and how they can and do affect other people, even though the other people may not even see you physically within that act or whatever practice, but through the one you're directly involved with, a lot of the time it comes through to someone else and someone else and someone else. Yes. And to me that is what what Christ was teaching
Uh,
to follow the way,
yes.
and which was love, love personified, and that this does affect. And yes, to me, that's the same premise.
Yes.
And you may never know how your actions or words affect someone down the road.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's a beautiful parallel.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that you call it the way? In Buddhism, it's also called the way. It's called the path. It's so beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, isn't Christ and the Buddha, aren't those words like the anointed one? Like,
Yes.
like somebody
Yes.
who's received the gift sort of thing and has the ability to speak about it and teach others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jesus would be is considered a Buddha. Jesus is a Buddha. Jesus is an awakened one.
Well, what was just said a second ago. I was going to say, Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself."
Yes.
That struck me exactly what this law of karma is referring to.
Yes.
If you set things in a positive way, things will maintain you will continue this ripple effect of goodness, of morality. And I don't like to use the word morality because that brings up all sorts of other stuff that people cling on to that think is moral. But the idea of alleviating suffering, helping others, and just generally doing good in the world, or shall I say, leaving the world better than what you found it, sort of thing.
Yes. Yes.
That's the whole point of everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm exactly with you. I think that is so true. And actually, that's actually a good segue. It's actually a perfect segue to this next slide in terms of where my mind goes with that thought. And this is a quote again by Thich Nhat Hanh. And here he starts off by talking about reincarnation, but then he kind of gets down to what I think is a very helpful place of exactly what you're saying in terms of the energy of your actions. What does that cause? What does that leave? What is the legacy of your actions? So he says reincarnation means there is a soul that goes out of your body and enters another body. That is a very popular and very wrong notion of continuation in Buddhism. If you think there is a soul, a self that inhabits a body and that goes out when the body disintegrates and takes another form, that is not Buddhism. When you look into a person, and he uses the word skandhas, and essentially this is sort of the heart of when you're asked a Buddha in terms when you ask a person in terms of what is a person comprised of, they talk about the skandhas, or think about them as elements or aggregates, parts of ourselves. And so we are made of, from a Buddhist perspective, form, so the body, feelings, perceptions, what we take in through the senses, mental formations, our thoughts, and consciousness, the dance and the orchestra of those four other things all together creating consciousness. There is no soul, no self outside of these five. So when the five elements go to dissolution, the karma, the actions that you have performed in your lifetime is your continuation. Exactly what you just said. What you have done and thought is still there as energy. You don't need a soul or a self in order to continue. And we'll talk about we can talk about that too. And this is what I love about Thich Nhat Hanh, is that he always uses these beautiful metaphors. It's like a cloud. Even when the cloud is not there, it continues always as snow or rain. The cloud does not need to have a soul in order to continue. There's no beginning and no end. You don't need to wait until the total dissolution of this body to continue. You continue in every moment. Go to the next one. And underlying what the Dharma is, underlying things like the Four Noble Truths, which you were speaking to,
Yes.
the Eightfold Path. it is all undergirded by these, what is called the 3 marks of existence, or how the Buddha characterizes our basic description of reality. And it's comprised of 3 things: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And we won't have time to unpack this too much, but we'll just kind of speak a little bit to them. So impermanence, what he is saying is that the Buddha said that all compounded phenomena disintegrates. Everything in the universe, us, trees, the ecos, like everything disintegrates. All things are made of parts, and all things fall apart. Everything is in a constant state of becoming and perishing, literally moment to moment, hour to hour, generation to generation. And for the most part, we live our lives trying to deny this reality. That's one of the things that he saw into the Dharma. That's one aspect of reality he saw. The second is the experience of suffering itself, dukkha. Every experience in some way is marked by some quality of suffering, whether it's extreme pain or just a background sense of unease. As long as we struggle to maintain a solid sense of self, our lives will be marked by this suffering. And I myself struggle with that definition for suffering, in the sense that I think that for me, what it points to is that even in my life contains enormous amounts of joy, enormous amounts of beauty. It also contains suffering. But what I'm aware of undergirding all of that is that even in the joy and beauty, there can be moments when I'm vaguely already worrying about the joy and beauty disappearing. It's the nuance of that. It's the nuance of that minutia of suffering to the anguish, the grief and loss we were just talking about. And so to sort of really see it being a very nuanced definition of what suffering is. And the third characteristic of the basic description of reality is that of non-self. And what he means by that is that there's no solid, separate, single self. There's no discrete entity that's called I or me. We are simply the product of multiple causes and conditions. Impermanence, the first one, describes how things are. Non-self describes what they are not. And this is me putting in this. I like to think of the self as a verb rather than a noun.
Mm.
That the self is something that is constantly changing. That the self is constantly in relationship to everything that's going on inside of me and outside of me. Who I was at the very beginning of this talk has already changed dramatically. And who I will be at the end of this talk will change as well. Another doctrine, which again is, remember that quote at the very beginning of the slide, we are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. That, I think, is Thich Nhat Hanh's ability to distill the Dharma and what is called Paticca Samuppada, which is called dependent origination. And a shorthand version of it is that everything is connected, period, full stop. What Christina Feldman says is Paticca Samuppada actually describes a vision of life or an understanding in which we see the way everything is interconnected, that there is nothing separate, nothing standing alone. Everything affects everything else. Causal relationships affected by everything that happens around us, and in turn affecting the kind of world that we all live inwardly and outwardly. And when I think of this as a reality, I think the most important word is relationship around this doctrine. What it is trying to say is that we are in relationship to everything. I think about it in relation to the climate crisis. I think about it in relation to choices I make here in terms of lifestyle that then contribute to the acidification of our oceans. I think about it in terms of road rage, and when somebody cuts me off and then I say something that is like, and my behavior becomes cruel or unkind to another person, and how that impacts the rest of the day. It's the doctrine of understanding that everything in the universe is connected.
And this is what the indigenous people
Yes.
have always known, and we threw out that culture.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because you know what I have on my note here by this slide? I have the quote, all my relations. Do you know how when in indigenous rituals, they will often honor and name all my relations. And that, what I love about that is that it decenters the human. What it does is that it equally prioritizes the animals, the trees, the ancestors of those who have died, the sky, the water, all my relations. That's exactly it. You're right.
It's also, I think, what Richard Rohr is getting at when he talks about non-dualism.
Yes.
Yes.
There is no them and us. It's all us.
That's exactly. In the same way, that's another wonderful way to look at non-self. You just described the doctrine of non-self again. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
It helps me when I'm, well, take an example of somebody cutting me off.
Yes.
I think to myself, how would I feel if that was somebody I knew, like my son who was driving that car? How would that change how I feel about it? It would change it a lot. So
yes.
to see each other as not separate from me, but part of who I am too, it's not an easy way to get. It's not easy to get there, but I think as I get older, it seems to be happening more often. And I certainly, you know, the birds and the animals, even the rats that come around, I have a deepening understanding of how, you know, there are our ancestors, really. They were here on this earth long before we were. And it's the same DNA molecule that makes their brains work and it makes my brains work, right? Yes.
I love that example, you know, because it makes me, I'm in a very similar place, Jim, in terms of I've been in treatment all year, and I was very much dreading having to go through chemotherapy again. And I also was aware of the fact that I wanted my frame of mind to not be, because it literally just because it feels like crap in your body. And I didn't want to go into it with a frame of mind of thinking, oh God, the medicine is the poison. The medicine is the poison. I wanted to go in with a more positive frame of mind. And what I did, which was really helpful, exactly what you're talking about, Jim, is that I did research. I've been on this drug called Taxol and Taxotere. And what I found out is that, okay, so how can I have a relationship with this drug that I can appreciate it? And so what I found were the organic properties of Taxol. And what I found was Taxol comes from the Pacific yew tree. And suddenly what I can start to imagine going into my vein is medicine from a Pacific yew tree. And it also comes from periwinkle. And how do we know this? Because these extraordinary little mice were a part of doing the research on, do you know what I mean? And it's all of those things. It's all of understanding that what is allowing me to live longer in my body is everything to do with the natural world around me. It's everything.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, we also have people like Brian Swim, you know, his book, Hidden Heart of the Cosmos.
What is it called?
The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos.
Oh, I got to write that one down.
he's a astrophysicist.
Okay.
He's saying, for instance, that the sun I forget what the dimensions are, but every second is giving up hundreds of millions of tons of itself, which it casts into this solar system, without which there's no you and me having a conversation right now, right?
Yes, yes.
And that's an example he's saying of in nature of sacrificing for the greater good. And that's what the
Yeah.
sun is doing, and that's basically the story of the universe.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. There's a very powerful book I also just read by a man named Richard Powers. It's called The Overstory, and it essentially takes that idea and premise and tells that similar story through the life of trees and how trees, the community, the society, the communication, the ecosystem of trees, and their relationship to different people through generations. And it does exactly that. It's such a beautiful book, but it does exactly that. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Can we go to the next one? So here we are. We've arrived at the Four Noble Truths. And this was one of the first teachings that the Buddha gave when his peers convinced him to teach. And again, now understanding what is the undergirding for the Four Noble Truths? Well, actually, dependent origination is. The three marks of existence are. The laws of karma are. The Dharma is what's undergirding all of this. And so what he said was, suffering exists. It exists. Dissatisfaction and dis-ease exists in our life. So that's the one thing. The good news is that we know what some of the origins of suffering is. Desires, aversions, attachments that can be seen through greed, hatred, and delusion or ignorance. That's the origin of what our suffering is based on. And here's the really good news, is that the origins can be ameliorated and stopped. And it's important to understand that what is called nirvana here can literally be a moment. It can be a state of mind. It doesn't have to be another place. It doesn't have to be a different reality. It doesn't have to be something that we die and go to. Nirvana is something that we can experience upon the cessation of suffering in our life here and now. Doesn't mean it's going to last, but that is how we can experience nirvana in the here and now. And then he said, and I also have a way to go about helping you understand the nature of the Dharma and the Eightfold Path that will lead you to the cessation of suffering. And so if we go to the Eightfold Path, and here is if you were to kind of look at the spiritual architecture of the Buddhist teaching, to me, it becomes a bit of a holy trinity. It becomes a moral compass that goes through, it kind of groups wisdom that can be seen and manifested in what is called right understanding and right aspiration. It goes into morality, but I hear you when you hear the word morality, because that can be a bit heavy-handed. What I like to use instead of the word morality is integrity. So let's substitute morality with integrity. And how we get that through right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then the third component of that trinity is either you could read it as concentration or you could read it as meditation. And we get that through right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And amidst all of these, there are teachings individually for each aspect of the Eightfold Path that breaks it down, that talks about exploring it, that has meditations to help you understand it, that has teachings to help you understand it. And what I want to point to, which is interesting, is that right there in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in the the seventh, you see right mindfulness. And so many people, and then I'm one, like for my, like I realize that I am implicit or complicit in this, is that so many folks equate mindfulness and the mindfulness movement here in North America as simply meditation, a spiritual tool, a spiritual technology to feel like a better person, to get what you want out of life, to whatever, however capitalism has co-opted mindfulness in the ways that it has, in the ways that it co-opts all kinds of spiritual practices. To understand that mindfulness within Buddhism is a part of a whole gestalt of so much more. It has an ethical framework. It's got integrity. It's got so much more than often how it is understood here in North America. Does that make sense? And I say this as a person who found Buddhism through mindfulness and absolutely mindfulness in a secular way, in a healthcare setting, where I learned to meditate to start to understand what the hell my thoughts were doing to me. It was incredible and so beneficial, but it is so much more than just that, than just an intervention. It is a part of this larger gestalt of Buddhism in the Eightfold Path. And I like this definition of Nirvana. The Pali word nirvana in Sanskrit was first used by the Buddha to describe the highest state of profound well-being a human is capable of attaining. The mind awakens from delusion, is liberated from bondage, is cleansed of all its defilements, becomes entirely at peace, experiences the complete cessation of suffering, and is no longer reborn. And again, we can think about that in terms of a life, and we can also think about that in terms of a moment. We can think about it in terms of a thought. We can think about it in terms of an experience. And then I love, here's Pema, she just brings it right down to the vernacular that I love. She says, the opposite of samsara is when all the walls fall down, when the cocoon completely disappears and we are totally open to whatever may happen, with no withdrawing and no centralizing into ourselves. That is her definition of nirvana. Okay. And finally, I don't think this is, I think, going to be the last slide before I kind of try to maybe bring it back out to the group for a discussion. But I also wanted to talk a little, to end it on this concept of Buddha nature. Because Buddha nature, I think, is Buddha nature is something that I feel very in touch with, and it feels like it's it's an animating force inside of me, and something that I try to stay very close to. And Buddha nature in Buddhism means our innate basic goodness, the seed of mindfulness and enlightenment in every person, representing our potential to become fully awake. The essential view of Buddha nature is as profound as it is simple. You are perfect just as you are in this very moment. It is comprised of awareness, love and compassion, and innate wisdom. The Buddha taught that there is no enlightenment and no wisdom that actually exists outside of us. From this perspective, what we gain from teachers, scriptures, or from following a spiritual path through all of its stages is not something that is new or external to us. When we follow the path, we simply gain more skillful methods to uncover our own wisdom and our own enlightenment. What is so important to understand about Buddha nature is that it's already in us. It isn't about acquiring more things. It's about having the ability to recognize that its existence inside of you. Does that make sense?
I had read
Total script.
something, a book was called Your Original Face. And
Yes.
the author said that basically Buddha nature was the natural state of mind that we're born with. and through the influence of others, we gradually fall away and become wrapped up in all these illusions and delusions and stuff. And we get further and further away. And for me, it's, I remember hearing a story about how do you keep like elephants that you have, let's say in a circus or whatever, how do you keep them from running away? Because they're so big, they can break anything. But they, as the story I heard, it was the baby elephants have a chain on their leg and they cannot break the chain when they're little. And they grow up with this chain, and they know that the chain can't be broken. So even once they're adults and they could break the chain, they don't try because they already know they can't break it.
Oh, that is a great analogy. Wow.
How does one break that chain? How does one come, like Buddha? The Buddha has already done that, and Jesus and some of these other people we were talking that all seem to come out around the same time, in the same century. So it's how does one break this disillusion? How does one become fully, like you say, with Buddha nature, the original face, the complete blank slate sort of thing? You're no longer weighed down with all these contradictions and things you pick up, through your life. When do you learn that you can actually break that chain, and it doesn't have any power over you?
Yes, I love that. That's a very powerful analogy, and I feel like I personally feel like I literally have to break that chain 1,000 times a day. 1,000 times a day, if I can remember to. I think that's the crucible of human experience.
There was a parable I read about, I think a fellow was being chased by a wild animal, and he fell down an abandoned well, and he grabbed the vine, and there was danger below him, danger above him, and yet at the same time, at the moment, he noticed there was honey oozing from the thing nearby, and even in that moment of extreme jeopardy, he still took the moment out to say, "Oh, there's honey," and it's delicious. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes.
And
yes.
am I understanding that right? It's living in the moment.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yep. I have when I was thinking about Buddha nature, I was thinking about a beautiful moment that I had a relationship with a woman whose husband had been brought into the ICU, and I met her in the complete chaos of him being brought into the unit as he was coding, and he was being resuscitated in front of us, and that's just a horrible thing for a person to have to witness of their loved one, and I was with her through that, and didn't say anything, just was a presence with her through that. Didn't even really know if she would remember me. And then the next about 5 days later, I was back on that part of the unit, and she called me in, and we started to have a relationship, and I stayed with her for, I followed her and her husband for a good couple of weeks while they were with us. And she identified as both Hindu and Christian. Mm-hmm. And when I went in there, and this is I think we were both very in touch with our Buddha nature. I went in there, and she was getting ready to leave. Her husband was being transferred to a different unit, and she said, "Come sit beside me." And so I came and I sat down beside her, and she said, when you sit with me, not only do I feel my goodness, not only do I feel your goodness, but I feel my goodness inside of me. And then she said, that goodness between us, that goodness is God. That goodness is love. That's the goodness of love between us. And what I think that she was speaking to was both of us feeling very close to our own Buddha nature, both of us in moments, being able to sit together and break that chain that you just talked of, and being able to see you are perfect just as you are in this very moment. And there she is, Christian Hindu, having that experience. Here I am, Buddhist, having that experience. And that I think is the essence of Buddha nature. And I'm going to leave it there. No more slides. That's plenty of slides. That's good. That's it. That's good. What I'd love to do is to just, again, kind of put it back out to the group here and to hear what your thoughts are here if you have questions, but also I think part of what I'm really curious about as well is how, wanting just to hear from you in terms of how is your faith, how is your spirituality animating your life right now as you struggle through a pandemic, as we struggle through some pretty huge forces in the world that are about sort of a reckoning in society around all kinds of things, around systems of oppression, around the climate crisis, around a pandemic. How is your faith? What is your relationship to your faith in regards to dealing with any of those things? Where is that for you in your life right now?
A tough one.
I know.
I think it's what sustains me that this is not going to be, no matter what the outcome, it's just not going to last forever. Nothing lasts forever in the same state.
Yes.
And there have been good things experienced while this has been on, like people caring for people,
Yes.
coming out and caring for their neighbors, no matter what their origin or their beliefs, just humanity. They are practicing humanity to each other. And that has not necessarily anything to do with what your religious beliefs are.
Yes. Yes.
Like the goodness between this woman and you. Hey, Pat, the connection.
Yeah. One human being to another human being.
There is something pretty extraordinary about how this time, it almost in some ways also gives people permission to be kind. I feel like we all want to be kind, but somehow adversity gives us permission to manifest that in a different way, to support each other, to help each other.
I was thinking about, sorry, go ahead, Pat.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's more appreciated by one another than normal times.
Yes.
The
I
kind.
notice even when we're out walking, we run into other people. One or the other of us gets off the sidewalk to maintain the social distance.
Yeah.
But there's almost always a wave and a smile and a thank you. And normally you'd walk by people like that, you probably wouldn't even speak, right?
Yes, it's true. You might not even acknowledge them.
Yeah, you might be afraid to,
Yeah.
you know. The other thing I was thinking about is the parallels. Like, I think it's John Spong said, I read this recently. Anyway, the quote I remember is that divinity is our birthright. It's not something we have to do something to earn.
Yes.
Each of us is born with divinity. You know, each of us is born connected to the ultimate reality.
Yes.
It's nothing we can do, you know, to really disown that. It's just what we're born with. It's how we more become aware of that and respond in a way which also reminded me of, you know, what Jesus had in mind when he's talked about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is now.
Yes.
It's within you.
Then you, yeah.
I would love to hear. I find that very inspiring and moving, and I feel like I automatically relate to that. How do you, what does that feel like in an embodied lived experience on a day-to-day level? Do you know, like, how do you walk with that?
I think part of it is being more mindful, more mindful about the current realities, you know, having relationships that matter to us, being able to breathe clean air,
Yes.
the ability to enjoy, you know, hearing the birds sing. It's starting off with that, like, wow, another day.
Yes.
And how can I live in a way which, you know, makes it a better place for the people that somehow I impact, and allows them to do the same for me.
Sometimes that's harder to accept it
It
than
is.
it is to
It is.
give it. Yeah. Mhm.
You know, I think that's, I don't want to preach a sermon here, but I think that's the real message of the Good Samaritan story.
Yes.
It wasn't about being, in fact, I think that go and do others at the end is a later addition. The real challenge for those people was being able to accept mercy from a person they brought up to hate, not to trust it. And that's the challenge of that parable. It's got little to do with looking after other people. It's
Yeah.
the challenge for those people hearing that story being told was, how in the world can I ever accept this kind of mercy from somebody that's not one of us?
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Supposed to be hated.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I was just going to add a little bit, if I understood what Jim was saying, was the idea, of saying, I've repeated many times, everyone is my teacher, and that I may learn something from them. You don't come into the world knowing everything, and you think you know things, and then somebody says something that I've often said this when I was at Bible study. A lot of the insights that I've had over the years in Christianity have not come from Christianity. They've come from reading books on Buddhism, on Hinduism, and even Islam. I mean,
Yes.
there's sometimes putting things in a slightly different way, all of a sudden I can make a connection, which I had not been able to make before.
Yeah.
It's almost like when people who are multilingual will search for a word in their native language and say, there's no word for that in English, but in Japanese, it's this word, and it means this word and this word in English.
Yes.
But yet there's no word in English for it. And that's kind of how it works for me. Sometimes there are things that aren't mentioned in Christianity, but after reading something by a Hindu spiritualist or something from the Buddha, it's sort of like there's connections made that I hadn't been able to make before, or shall I say a more fuller understanding of existence, of my existence. And the idea that everything is illusion, that it's the only reality is here and now, it's right this moment, that's it. And worrying about tomorrow or being drawn back by, like I said, the idea with the chain on your leg, those things that happened to you in the past that maybe crippled you psychologically or whatever and made you afraid to try things or whatever. If you can free your mind of that nonsense, then you are like Jim said, like we all got the anointing or whatever, by when we were born, and it's like I just want to build the ability to live that reality, to be everything that I can be as a human being. And by that I don't mean I aspire to be Prime Minister of Canada or whatever. I mean to live, like you said, the Dharma, the idea, the fullness of my existence.
Yes.
and to not do good in order to live another life in heaven, but that whatever I did would radiate out from what I've done. And even after I'm gone, these things would still be going forward in a positive way.
I think that too. I think of that, especially I'm a person who doesn't have children. And when I think about my legacy, what is my legacy? What are the ripples? What are quote, what are my children that I leave? I want my children to be my actions. I want my children to be my ripples. Those are my children.
Mm.
When you consider the fact that we have all evolved over millions of years, and we all come from the same source. We now are the universe in conscious form, the
Yep.
human form.
Yep.
So it shouldn't surprise us that what so many, I mean, the golden rule is part of almost every known religion on the earth, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be surprising that that's the case because we come from love.
Exactly.
And God is love. So it shouldn't be surprising to have similar kinds of understandings of reality and expectations from different faith traditions, different, people like Buddha and Jesus,
Yeah.
and others,
Yeah.
who are being motivated by the same loving source that we all have our roots in.
Yeah. I think about that when I think about Buddha nature. I also think my wife comes from the Quaker tradition. And I always think of there is that of God in each of us. And I feel like that is Buddha nature. There is that of God in each of us. It's just a different way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the non-dualism also includes our religious traditions, right?
Yes. Yes.
So much of religions have been triumphalistic and thinking they have the only way, and if you don't think a certain way,
Yeah.
you're on the other side.
Yeah.
Jim, I used to have a friend who was very much like that. There was religions, and then there was Christianity.
Yeah.
There was the tryhards, and then there was the actual. And I got him really angry one time. I said, the sun that hits the earth every day, we know when you hold up a prism to it, it's not actually one light. It's a variety of colors. And I said, which one is the true color? You know what I'm saying? It's like if you see there's red, yellow, blue, green. Which is the true color?
Yeah.
Which one is the truth? It's all coming from the same beam, but because of this glass, it's able to break it down into these various colors, its very elements. Which one is the truth? And that's
Truth is all of them together.
yeah. And that's kind of what we were talking about. This idea of like comparative, like the idea, like you said, like the goal. Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." I recall the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Prophet Muhammad says, don't wish for others what you wouldn't wish for yourself. There seems to be this constant universal thing. The emphasis seems to be on doing good. And again, like I said before, leaving the world better than what you found it.
Yes.
Even if it's only a little bit better. I mean, doing what you can to alleviate others' suffering.
Yep.
Did he hit you? Dave, did he hit you?
No, I moved away in time. You were talking with your hands.
Oh.
No, actually, I was talking about the friend and what the answer was.
Oh, no, I'm not that.
Oh, he was
Yeah, no.
he was saying, analogies will only take you so far.
Ah, okay.
He didn't dispute the truth. He just wouldn't take it up. Period. But then again, like that's the whole purpose of parables, or I was saying about Zen Buddhism. The idea of it's something to chew on. There's another story I know from the Buddha when somebody asked him about the truth of the religions, and he describes the 4 blind men, I think, standing aroring an elephant or something.
Yes.
And
Yes.
one fellow saying it's broad, it goes on forever. And the other one says it's like a snake, and the other one goes, it smells bad, depending where you're on the elephant, but it's all the elephant, right?
Yes. Yes.
And if you can't see it, then you're only left with what your other senses can tell you, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I early on I backed away from the moral word, because it's become loaded. Like the word Christian has become loaded. When you mention that, people immediately think of what they see on television and stuff, and these people with the signs and everything, and they're so moral. And then people, if that's morality, I don't want any part of that. You know, people would much rather tell you you're going to go to hell for not believing in Jesus than do good for other people. That's their payoff, you know, to make you feel bad about yourself, or feel hopeless, or feel sad, or like you were saying, you know, you're gay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, what, you know, it's your fault. Well,
Yeah.
how is it your fault? It's like being left-handed. I didn't ask for this. I am what I am. I have to live the way I am. I can't be something and I'm not. And sending me to conversion therapy is only going to torture me more.
Yeah.
They can't change anything.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the beauty of spiritual community is. It is all about, we are relational creatures. We need each other. We need each other. And so the very fact that we find each other through spirituality, through spiritual community, it is the breath of life.
I guess, I mean, this experience tonight is one of those, right? There's that sense of community amongst us right now, I think.
Yeah.
And learning from each other,
And learning from each other, yeah.
growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you said earlier, you're not the same person at the end of this evening
Yes.
as we were at the start.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of the beautiful thing of life. That's us being a part of the web of it. Yeah. I'm cognizant of the time. I think I've been rambling for a while, and I know folks, it's getting to be a little bit late. How are we all doing?
I'm fine. I've enjoyed this very much. It's been
Okay.
I think we all have. I know I have.
That's wonderful. It's just a real privilege to be able to be invited into the intimacy, and to be trusted to be invited into the intimacy of your community, of your congregation, of your space. So thank you so much. And thank you, Jim, for extending the invitation again. I very much appreciate it. It's a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And it fills me with love. Exactly. The bottom line, it fills me with love and meaning. So thank you.
Well,
I
thank
feel
you.
some of the,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for responding. Really enjoyed
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank-
much.
Good
thank
night.
Mark
Thank you very much.
for the suggestion.
Okay, good. Okay.
May
And
you
please-
be well, Suzanne.
Thank you, and you
Yes.
too, and feel free if there's any other questions, or if you want to talk about any other things, please feel free to share my email with folks, okay?
Okay,
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you all.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Good night.